So you're a big fan of motorsport, or maybe you're just a big fan of video games and enjoy playing the likes of Forza Horizon 5 and Need for Speed every now and then. Maybe you watched the Gran Turismo movie and thought, hey, that looks pretty cool, I wonder if I could do that myself. You keep hearing the term sim racing bounded about, but you're not exactly sure what that term actually means. Is it something that everyone can do? How does it differ from simply firing up your PlayStation and playing a racing game? Well, let's talk about it. So what do people really mean when they use the word sim racing? For starters, sim is short for simulated, so simulated racing. Now this is used in a slightly different context to how it would be used in something like EA Sports FC or Football Manager, where you simulate an event. In sim racing, it's not about getting the computer to do something for you, it's about trying to realistically replicate the real world of racing as accurately as possible. Now with racing, this comes in many forms. You've got the driver, so you as a sim racing driver are trying to replicate the actions of a real driver. You've also got racing as a sport. The games are trying their best to replicate what really happens in a real motorsports race in a game. And then of course, you've got car behavior, you've got track behavior. In sim racing, the technology tries to make the cars react in the same way that they would on a real circuit. So basically, you've got all of these factors working together in harmony to try and recreate something that's as close to the real sport of racing as possible. Now you might hear people describing certain games or software as a simulator. You might also hear people describing the thing they're using to drive, aka wheel or pedals, as their simulator. It's maybe better to think of sim racing as simulation racing rather than simulated racing. At the end of the day, it all kind of means the same thing. Now, some people view sim racing as a more accessible alternative to real racing, and some people view sim racing as just another form of gaming, but quite simply, for most people, sim racing is a hobby. So another question you might have would be, how does sim racing differ from just playing a racing game? In some ways, it doesn't really differ, because at the end of the day, racing games are always trying to simulate the real world of racing to some extent. I guess the big question comes down to what technology is being used, and therefore how realistic is it, and also what are the intentions of the game producers. There are of course plenty of racing games that we all know and love that are clearly designed primarily to be fun for everyone, so a child can pick up a controller and play the game, they can fire around corners at full speed or go over jumps or just compete in a realistic style race on a controller. And that's what sells at the end of the day. Mass market racing games sell because they're easy to pick up for anyone, and they allow you to kind of feel like a racing driver in the same way that if you're good at FIFA and score some screamers, you'll feel just a little bit like Kylian Mbappe. And I guess that's one of the things that sets sim racing apart from other sports. You don't have to be Kylian Mbappe to be good at FIFA. You don't have to be Ricky Fowler to be good at a PGA game. But with sim racing, it's a different story. A real racing driver, driving a real racing car, essentially sits in a seat. Okay, yes, they move their hands and feet and limbs to drive the car and control it, but relatively speaking, their body is stationary, and that's something that you can actually replicate with technology. You don't have to run across a field and kick a ball. Now, how closely sim racing can replicate real racing is something massive and deep and probably for another video, but you can kind of see how the world of sim racing maybe differs from other sports when it comes to the gaming equivalent. Now, all racing games fall somewhere on a very complicated sliding scale between a game that's just primarily designed to be as fun as possible and a game that's designed to be as realistic as possible. But it's a lot more nuanced than that. Just because something's more realistic doesn't make it easier or more difficult, doesn't make it more or less fun. Now, going back to the original question, something's generally considered to be sim racing if the game it's using is primarily designed to be as realistic as possible, and also if the controls you're using are as realistic as possible. But that's not everything. You can still sim race with a controller, and that's absolutely fine. You can also still sim race on a game that's maybe less realistic and more designed for fun, but generally speaking, we're talking about the serious, realistic simulation software. Let's move on then to equipment. What equipment do you actually need to get involved in sim racing? And it's not as simple as you might think. As I previously mentioned, what you don't actually need is a steering wheel and pedals. You can sim race using a controller or a keyboard and mouse. I do know of some incredibly competitive sim racers that compete at a decent level of esports using an Xbox controller, for example. Of course though, if you want to get the most out of this hobby and you have the space and importantly you have the money, then by all means you should get yourself a wheel and pedal set. There are many of these that you can simply mount to a desk and away you go, but it's even better if you can to get yourself a sim racing rig. Now, the biggest benefit to having a high-quality steering wheel and pedal set comes down to the fancy technology that's used. Something called force feedback is crucial. It's essentially the information you get through your steering wheel telling you what the car is doing underneath you, how it's behaving relative to the circuit. And this is essentially simulating the feeling that you would get as a racing driver holding a real steering wheel in a real car. Now, obviously with a controller, you can still input something between 0 and 100, for example, in terms of how much steering angle or how much throttle you're putting on, but you won't get that feeling back from what the car is doing, so therefore it's going to be harder to be very competitive. Now, the next piece of equipment is something you definitely will need, and that is, of course, your console or your PC. Now, games consoles are designed for gaming on a mass scale, so they will work for most people, and they're honestly relatively affordable. You can certainly get your sim racing fix only ever playing on console, and that's great, but PCs, on the other hand, although a bit more complex and potentially a bit more expensive, do have a higher ceiling of performance and genuinely just more opportunities in the long run. Now, if you're on a tight budget, console sim racing is definitely a realistic entry point. You don't need a PC to enjoy this hobby, but I highly recommend as an end goal, if this is something you love doing and you want to get the most out of, it's worth looking at in the future. Save up the money, get yourself a good gaming PC, and you can really enjoy everything that sim racing has to offer. There's a weird sort of animosity between PC gamers and console gamers a lot of the time, and that is also the case in sim racing, and honestly, I don't understand it. At the end of the day, we all share the same hobby, we all do it in the way that we can afford and want to do it, so I don't understand why there's some sort of drama between these two sides. There's absolutely nothing wrong with sim racing on console, and there's of course nothing wrong with sim racing on PC. Now, one more thing before I move on from equipment. There are plenty of other peripherals that you can add to your rig or your desk in future, things like handbrakes, gear shifters, lap timers, dashboard displays. Now, as amazing as all of these things sound, I mean, you can also get motion rigs and you can get butt kickers and all sorts of stuff. They're not absolutely vital to your experience, so if you're getting started out, I highly recommend just getting the basics nailed, find out how much you enjoy it, get the things you want to do, and then eventually you can work towards having all of these extras on your rig. Okay, so SITREP. You know what sim racing is, you know what equipment you're going to need for it, and you also know the difference between regular racing games and hardcore sim racing. But why do we do it? What is it that makes sim racing special? In simple terms, endless possibilities. There are so many things you can do within the world of sim racing, and I'm sure if you're new to this, there's probably way more than you even expect. I'm going to try and give you a quick summary of some of the things you can enjoy within sim racing and sim driving. Let's start off with the big one, racing. If you love racing, if you love wheel-to-wheel action, you can do it. You can race other people in real time online of a similar skill level, or you can race offline against computer-controlled opponents any time of day, any day of the year. Now, online multiplayer is a fascinating thing. You can start off in public lobbies or even private lobbies with friends where carnage happens and it's all a bit of a laugh. But if you want to take it more seriously, you can go ranked online racing, where you can build up a safety rating and an experience level, for example. Many games facilitate these sort of systems, and they allow you to race against people of a similar level and build up your experience. If you want to take things a step further from there, you can look into the world of league racing. I can't stress how incredible it is to find a great sim racing community, and there are hundreds of them all over the world. All you need to do is head over to social media, head onto the internet, and have a look for some good sim racing communities that are looking for new members, because I promise you, it will open up a whole world you don't know exists. You'll meet like-minded people, you'll have organised races with people of a similar skill level and shared interests. Genuinely, you just make lifelong friends. I'll never forget the feeling of doing my first ever organised league racing event when I was about 14. It was just so exciting, the buzz around it, the amount of practice I put in, all leading towards this one moment, and genuinely it was just so much fun, so I highly recommend looking into all of that stuff. Of course, if you're not into racing online, you don't want to make new friends, that's totally fine as well. You can race offline, as I was saying before, and it's not just racing you can do. Many sim racing titles have in-depth career modes that you can enjoy and basically live the life of a real racing driver, enjoying cutscenes or tier systems, whatever it might be. And maybe wheel-to-wheel action is not for you at all. Maybe you just want to head around your favourite race circuit in the world in your favourite ever GT car. Well, with sim racing you can easily do that. Or maybe you want to just cruise along the A82 in a Caterham that you want to buy for doing the North Coast 500 one day. The variety in disciplines even is incredible. Maybe you're just into F1 and only want to do Formula 1 style races. That's absolutely fine. Maybe you're into rallying or drifting. There will be games and communities that are designed for just that. Do you want to only race GT3 cars? There are far too many games and communities for that. And how about driving a rocket-powered bus down a mountain? Well, for that, there's BeamNG.Drive. Okay, we're kind of moving away from sim racing towards sim driving here, but trust me, you're going to want to try BeamNG.Drive. For me personally, one of the things I find incredibly fascinating about the world of sim racing is that you can do exactly what a driver does in a real car in real life. And then the next day, if you're feeling different, you can do exactly what a real driver can't do in a real car or in real life, like driving the wrong way around a circuit, going up the corkscrew, for example, or just crashing over and over and over again. Maybe you want to see what happens if you drive up Pikes Peak in a Formula 1 car. Or I can test drive a shopping trolley, because why not, Race Room?
Dear God.
Now, of course, sim racing isn't perfect. There are downsides. You might end up spending a lot of money or putting in a lot of time to it, but that's just like any other hobby. And you can treat it like any other hobby as well. You can enjoy it in the way that you want to enjoy it. You can enjoy it at the pace that you want to enjoy it. It's not about what anyone else wants, it's about what it brings to you. So whatever your reason is for being interested in the first place, I highly recommend just getting yourself out there and getting involved. I don't think you'll regret it. If you've made it this far into this video, then the chances are you are engaged in sim racing, or you want to be engaged in sim racing, and that is great news. If you want to see and hear for yourself what's happening in the world of sim racing, whether that's new updates, new games coming out, or whether you just want to learn more about it, how to set up your wheel, or how to drive faster, I would highly recommend, if that's the case, subscribing to this Race Anywhere channel, because I'm going to be bringing you lots of video content in the coming weeks and months surrounding pretty much every angle of sim racing. Do let us know down in the comments below if you are new to the world of sim racing, and what is it about sim racing that makes you want to get involved, and I'll do my best to respond to any questions you might have as well. But in the meantime, I've been John from Race Anywhere. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great week.